Um, Hello, my name is Heather Hamill. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Sociology here in Oxford. And thank you very much for the invitation to speak at this event. What I want to talk to you about this morning is the process of collecting data, actually. This is part of a pilot project. We're about 2/3 of the way through the project, sponsored by the Wellcome Trust. And actually, we've just come to the end of the data collection period. So if I had been giving this talk about 6 weeks ago, the title of this talk would have included quite a few rude words, and probably would not have been very appropriate. But after a few weeks' reflection, I'm a bit more, I think I'm a bit more positive about the whole process. Yeah, I think I just want to be quite honest about how we've been getting on, basically. So none of this is polished, and some of it is a bit messy, and some of it might reflect some of my frustrations about the whole process. So the project is about risk and trust in medicinal transactions in sub-Saharan Africa. And it's a collaborative project between institutions in the UK and in sub-Saharan Africa. So we're working with the National Institute of Medical Research in Tanzania, 2 departments at the University of Cape Coast in Ghana. There's myself, and then there is my colleague Kate Hampshire in the Department of Anthropology, and another colleague at the School of Medicine and Pharmacy and Health at Durham University. So we've got quite a few people coming with from the hard sciences and the social sciences with different prior assumptions about how to do research and what good research is and what a research project should look at. So some of that needs to be resolved before you even got to the data collection process. We also, so my colleague Kate Hampshire and I hold the grant, but we were very committed to the idea that this should not just be an exchange of money for data with these institutions. We were very committed to the idea that this should actually be a partnership, and that it should be a shared intellectual partnership as well. There should be a shared ownership of this project, not least because, we don't live and work in these countries. Kate in particular has worked in sub-Saharan Africa for a very long time, but still, nevertheless, we're not the experts actually. And also, when it comes to dissemination, wanting to have some impact and possibly bring about behavioural change as a result of the findings of this project, we really, really need our local partners to be on board with that, because they're the people who would understand better than us about how to get messages across. Because we've got lots and lots of examples of public information campaigns that just haven't worked. So our idea was that this should be a partnership from beginning to end through the whole life cycle of the research. So what I'll do is just give a brief background to what we're doing, to the background to the research, and then talk a bit in detail about the actual process of gathering the data. So the project is about risk and trust in medicinal transactions. So what we're interested in, although this slide is about pharmaceuticals, is about all types of medicinal and therapeutic interventions that people might take. Pharmaceuticals in particular are facing a number of different threats. There's obviously issues of antimicrobial resistance, there's issues to do with pricing and patents, etc. But also, and especially in countries across sub-Saharan Africa, there's this issue of counterfeit products. Okay, so counterfeit products in this region is not specific to pharmaceuticals. These countries are awash with counterfeit cosmetics, counterfeit alcohol, counterfeit building supplies, car parts. There's a huge market there because there is a weak regulatory framework. Okay, but our particular interest is in substandard, spurious, falsely labelled, falsified and counterfeit medical products, which is the WHO, the World Health Organization definition. And the WHO has kind of given up trying to quantify this problem. They have, in 2013, they developed a monitoring system whereby the various regulatory bodies across the world would notify them whenever they came across a counterfeit product, but these products are actually very difficult to identify. This is one that we picked up in Ghana during the fieldwork. It's called Veramox. It's a deworming product tablet that you take every 3 to 6 months. Now, Ghana has a deworming program, so there are a lot of people taking this product. But the problem with this is, well, it's two problems. One is it's impossible to tell that that is a counterfeit product without actually doing some kind of biochemical test. And second of all, it's very difficult to link taking the product to any kind of therapeutic outcome. Because in Ghana, a lot of people have some worms. Some people have a lot of worms. But because you're taking this product every 3 to 6 months, it's very difficult to link feeling better or not to taking that particular product. And also, you may be taking lots of other things as well at the same time. Okay. So that means that the market for counterfeit pharmaceuticals is actually one that is very profitable. Okay. It's difficult for people to know what they're taking. So one central problem is that the efficacy of the medicine is impossible to discern directly from its appearance. So I've got, just another example, I've got a packet of generic ibuprofen here. I can't really tell whether it is ibuprofen or not. And I put a lot of my trust, most of my trust actually, in the regulatory framework in the UK. Okay. But if you have a weak regulatory framework, then that becomes very difficult. So the risks include whether the medicine has an active ingredient or not. Perhaps the medicine has the wrong amount of active ingredient, too much or too little, which could have a big impact on an individual's health. Or perhaps it might be the wrong medicine in that it's not the right medicine for the condition that a person is suffering from. And so therefore, to take this medicine, to take this ibuprofen, involves an act of trust, both in the product itself and in the person that sells it to you. Okay, and that's really where our interest lies, in this issue of trust. And it's particularly pertinent where you have weak formal regulation of pharmaceuticals and healthcare generally, where you have poor healthcare access, which drives people more and more to the informal sector, where you have widespread drug counterfeiting, which we know exists, although, as I said, it's impossible to quantify it, and where there's very little possibility of redress if something goes wrong. Not least because it's hard to link efficacy, but also there's just there are no regulatory bodies, strong regulatory bodies or framework in which you can go to and seek some kind of redress if things do not go well for you. So our focus then, the focus of this research, is on the role of trust, but particularly in medicinal transactions in the supply chain. So what we're interested in is understanding what is going on whenever something changes hands, okay, at different points in the supply chain. This is a diagram of the formal supply chain, but we're interested in what happens from raw ingredient all the way through to end product, and then the consumer who takes the end product. We're also interested in informal supply chains as well, not least because most people who live in Ghana and Tanzania buy medicines from lots of different outlets, both registered pharmacies and also just a lot of buying on the side of the streets. So that's our emphasis, basically. We want to understand what's happening whenever a product changes hands. Okay, we want to understand not just what products are being exchanged, but also how people come to trust that product, why they've chosen this product and not another product, why they've chosen to buy from this person and not another person. Okay. So we want to understand the behaviour, but we also want to understand the meaning behind the behaviour. And so our method is ethnographic. And what I mean by that is that it involves prolonged periods of time spent in the field collecting data in depth. Okay, so we're not Our sample is non-random. The sample evolves over time. It may change and involves some level of data analysis as we're collecting the data. In practical terms, what this means is going to the broadest range and variety possible of outlets in which medicines are exchanged, and spending a great deal of time in that location. So here, these pictures are taken from a market in rural Tanzania. And these people are selling a whole variety of herbs and barks that you boil up to make a medicine. They've got all sorts of different kinds of things that you can use to treat a whole range of different ailments. And we basically sit with the sellers for as long as they'll let us sit with them, ideally for the whole day, and watch every exchange that takes place, and then interview both the buyer and the seller about the exchange. Okay, we interview the buyer about why have they come. So in this particular market, there were maybe about 8 different stalls basically selling the same stuff. So we're asking the buyer, why have you come to this particular stall and not this stall over there? Have you been here before? Do you know this person personally? What is it about them that has persuaded you to come to their stall? Is it about price, or is it about lots of other things? And then we also interview, this is the owner of this particular stall, this is my colleague Kate, who ended up being co-opted into actually selling some stuff. We're interviewing the seller about their background, their experience, and also, how they go about selling their products, what they know about their products, what information they're giving to the buyer, okay? And we're doing this in registered pharmacies, over-the-counter medicine shops, in marketplaces, as well as at the side of the road with people just selling out of a box, and also with faith healers, witch doctors in inverted commas, basically anywhere where this kind of exchange takes place. So that's basically what we're doing. And here we are again, and this is my colleague Simon Marawa from the University of Cape Coast, and we are just sitting in a village outside a medicine shop. We've got a product that has just been bought, and we're talking to the buyer and seller about, why this product basically, and what do you know about it. The important thing that we're doing is that we're not going in with a pre-specified questionnaire, okay? We have no research tool of that nature, okay? This is a conversation which is focused around what happens and what we observe. And so, so we don't go in with a set of questions, because we do not want to basically get a certain set of answers, okay? Our sample also evolves over time. So if a buyer says, well, usually I buy from this guy over there, but he's not here today, then the next day we go and look for the guy over there, basically. So that's basically how the research unfolded. So there were a couple of things that we needed to do. One was that we needed to have a shared intellectual understanding of the project. So the project is ethnographic, but it's also within a particular theoretical framework. And so we needed our Tanzanian and Ghanaian colleagues not just to understand this theoretical framework, but also essentially to accept it and buy into it. So that was the first step. That took a lot of time, and that theoretical framework had to change quite a lot, okay? And then we had to persuade them that actually explain to them that we didn't have a questionnaire and we weren't carrying out a survey, because a lot of research that's done on behaviour around health in sub-Saharan Africa involves these health-seeking behavioural questionnaires that people fill out. And that was kind of their expectation. whenever we arrived, that would be what we were doing. The responsibility for this places a much greater responsibility for collecting the data on the individuals who are collecting the data, okay? Because we are expecting them to basically do what we would do if we were in the field. Because both Kate and I are committed to this method of ethnographic research, of gathering nuanced data that's situated in what is actually happening. But the reality of our lives is that we both have academic jobs that involve being Director of Graduate Studies, Chair of Examiners, Deputy Heads of Department, that mean we have to be in our universities. We also both have 3 children under the age of 9, and we also both have partners who have full-time jobs and, you know, not very happy about us disappearing off for prolonged lengths of time. And that is the reality of, that's our professional reality. And I don't think that's spoken about enough. And so we wanted to try and find a way in which we could do this whilst kind of not, basically we wanted to find a way where we could peer over the shoulders of the research assistants and where we could collect data in the way in which we would want to have it done if we were there ourselves, given that we could not physically be there for these prolonged periods of time. So that was our aspiration. So the way in which we've gone about doing it is through a process that first of all involves some discussion is the wrong word, quite lengthy, in-depth debates about the empirical ideas and the theoretical ideas with the research teams in Ghana and Tanzania. And then once we had moved beyond that, then discussing how we would go about collecting the data and what that would look like. I mean, even just the achieving a shared understanding of what a transaction was took quite a long time in both those settings, okay? And then the training process was about, somewhat classroom-based, but mostly involved us going into the field with the research assistants and the research team and basically doing the work alongside them. So initially, Kate and I would be doing the interviews, and then gradually we would move towards the research assistants doing the interviews and Kate and I sitting alongside them. And then coming back into the classroom and reviewing in depth and detail what questions had been asked, how they had been answered, how they had been followed up or not. So we spent 4 weeks in each setting going through this process of going into the field one day, then the research assistants having to spend quite a lot of time late into the evening typing up the field notes, then the next day back in the room, going through each of the research assistants' field notes in detail, pointing out, you know, where they had done well, but also highlighting areas in which they'd failed to follow up, failed to probe, and working through with them how to do this. And time again, they kept saying to us, why can you not just give us a questionnaire? When we came back to the UK, that process then would have to continue. And the way in which we tried to do it is through trying to get the research assistants to write up their field notes within 24 to 48 hours after they collected the data. And then having Skype conversations with them, again, in detail, going through these interview notes. Because what we're looking for was the detail and the description and the probing and the following up. And so not just accepting an answer to a question which might be, oh, you know, why did you buy this product? And the answer might be, well, it's within its expiry date. Okay, that's not enough for us. What we want to know is, well, what's important about the expiry date? Is it possible that there may be products that are within their expiry date, but they're not actually what you think they are? And so the discussion must go like that, rather than just, okay, we've got somebody here who pays attention to expiry dates, let's move on to the next question. What we have discovered was that, so our aspiration was that the research assistants, the research teams would spend time, say a week in one location, collecting the data, and then move on to another location. What in fact happened was that through this review process, we had to keep sending research assistants back to the same field site several times over in order for them to go more in depth. And that was a source of great frustration, both for us and for them. Okay, and actually a sort of a point of resistance, where there were all sorts of reasons why they couldn't go back to the same research site. All of a sudden, you know, the road was too potholed, or because it was just difficult for them to accept that, you know, they hadn't done enough here. They really couldn't sort of it was quite hard to get to them to the point to say that, look, you know, you really have got to go deeper, and this is what deeper looks like. Okay, so in the end, what we've had to do, although this project is qualitative, and so we're not overly concerned about, you know, the total N, the total number of observations that we might have, we did have an aspiration to cover a sort of range and diversity of different types of transaction points. And so we've had to sacrifice some of that aspiration of range and diversity over getting the data that we think that we can actually use in terms of having that depth. The other thing that I think was a point of great frustration for the research teams was we couldn't tell them in advance, like a week or two in advance, of where they were going to be going. Okay, we were forcing them to live in a situation of quite high levels of uncertainty around their work lives, because the decisions about the next sort of location was dependent on the current location, because the sample would evolve depending on the information that we got. So our idea would have been that we would review at the end of a week and then say, right, okay, so we think we've got enough of this type of setting. We need to move to a more rural setting or a more urban setting. We need to do more faith healers. We need to focus more on the Maasai. That's how we wanted to do it. But what the field team wanted was to know where exactly they were going to be week on week. Okay, and again, that's a sort of, and I think that perhaps we were not as sensitive to that as we should have been, actually. And if I were to do this again, I think I would think a bit more carefully about how to manage that. Because I think those uncertainties around actually just where you're going to be on a day-to-day basis actually had quite a big impact on how they felt about doing the research. So that was the process that we've been involved in so far in terms of particularly this reviewing and revisiting field sites, and having these Skype conversations, which at times were actually quite difficult to have, because at the end of the day, you know, it's difficult to kind of give constructive criticism. It's even harder, I think, sometimes to give constructive criticism remotely and have that accepted and taken on board. So I think also there's this very steep learning curve for both Kate and myself in delivering that and how best to deliver that. So in the end, what is working? Well, our aspiration is very much about capacity building. That's what we wanted to do. The last thing we wanted to do was basically say to our partners in Ghana and Tanzania, here's a certain amount of money, give us the data. Okay, we wanted this to be about building capacity in terms of developing their ability to engage intellectually with the project and also methodologically, because particularly for the colleagues in Tanzania who work in the National Institute of Medical Research, they'd never done this kind of work before. Okay, so it was completely new to them. And also, it involved this dialogue, which again, us being the partner that had the money, I think in previous projects that they had been involved with, they would have been much more accepting of being told what they had to do. But actually, we needed them to speak up as well and to contribute both intellectually, but also to the ideas about where the fieldwork should evolve as the project continued. We also did find that, you know, we could manage this project remotely. It wasn't perfect, and there are things that we've learned and that we might do differently, but it is possible by using Skype, by using Twitter and Facebook, that you can sort of, you know, you're not there, but you can be looking over the shoulder of what's going on, okay, as long as people are responsive to you, okay. I think our professional relationships with our colleagues are so much stronger than they would have been. I think we have entered into something really quite special here. And certainly I have been very challenged by it, not just intellectually, but professionally as well, in thinking about how my ways of working and my ideas about research. And to a certain extent, we have really been quite successful at getting the kind of data that we wanted, albeit we have had this trade-off that has had to occur. But at the end of the day, this is a pilot project. And so, you know, we're piloting this method and piloting this technique, and we have to keep this in mind. So it's a learning curve. What hasn't worked so well, getting the kind of data that we want, because we have had this trade-off. Also, and this is perhaps because we were unrealistic, keeping to the schedule has been really difficult in terms of trying to ensure that people, write up their field notes and write up their field notes in enough depth and detail with that kind of description that we need about these interactions, about these transactions that we can find useful. Okay, so a lot of the problem at the start was actually getting the research assistants and the research teams to write good field notes. Okay, because again, perhaps probably mostly a large part of it, our responsibility for not actually telling them just how much description they needed, that we really needed to download their brains. But also just the other thing I think that we underestimated was the amount of stamina that you need to spend several hours writing up field notes. Okay. And whilst as a PhD student or as a researcher and ethnographer yourself, because it's your project and you have ownership of your project, you're more likely to do it. If you're a research assistant or a member of a research team, then the idea of spending several hours in the evening typing up field notes is not all that attractive, and people will cut corners. And the review process, again, I think has been somewhat successful, but perhaps not as successful as it might have been. And again, that's partly our responsibility as well, that we were sort of very aspirational about having these Skype meetings, and they would occur at these particular times, and then real life gets in the way. Okay, you've got a meeting, you've got this, you've got that, and that's on both sides. That's not just on their side, but also on our side. So that meant that the timetable, there was quite a lot of slippage in the timetable, basically, which then has a direct impact on the data collection. And inevitably, there is a lot of variation between the researchers and those collecting the data about the type of data that they manage to gather. And that in and of itself is also a challenge as well. And we had to make a decision at a certain point in the data collection process about which members of the research team we were going to keep and which members of the research team we were going to let go. And that was quite hard decisions to have to make as well. So in conclusion then, on reflection, I think that establishing and managing expectations is absolutely crucial. And in a sense, this was a pilot project and we were doing it in the dark. We'd not done it like this before. If we were to do it again, I think we would do it differently in the sense of setting up exactly what our expectations are in advance of the data collection process. And I think that as I said, what we've created is definitely more than an exchange of money for data, but perhaps not quite an equal intellectual partnership, to be perfectly honest. But perhaps that is something that I think that is something we can still aspire to. And then now what happens now, the other thing that we really wanted to do, and we really wanted to be able to facilitate, was to foster local partnerships between the academics in the country that we are working with and regulatory bodies in order to have an exchange, in order for them to be able to access data. And so that's something which, a letter from the University of Oxford can sometimes help facilitate better than just a letter from the University of Cape Coast in Ghana. So that's something that we would like to be able to do. We also need to think carefully about the dissemination of findings through information campaigns, through stakeholder meetings, and that's where our local colleagues have the advantage in terms of knowing who is best to invite to these things, how to invite them, and also how to get the information out there into the local population about the findings that we're coming up with. If this is a shared intellectual partnership, then what happens with publications? Who writes them? What's the authorship order, etc., etc.? And these are things that we've not actually resolved yet. There's also this question of joint ownership of data as well. So who gets to use it and under what circumstances that we need to resolve. And also moving forward with the new grant application, you know, we've taken these teams so far, and if we were to apply, this is a pilot study, the expectation is that we would apply for a much bigger grant, maybe 5 years or something like that long, is, you know, do we continue to invest in these institutions that we've invested in so far, or do we actually take the decision, certainly with one of them, that perhaps we would be better in not working with them again and putting all our eggs into the other institution's basket, basically. So that's where we are at with it. I would say it's been an incredibly interesting, rewarding and difficult project to be part of, but I'm certainly happy to have been part of it. So thank you.